You may. Janet. Ms. Arias, please take the stand.
Please stand for the jury.
Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and counsel. Ms. Arias, you are still under oath. Do you understand?
Yes, I do. Thanks.
You may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Arias.
Good morning.
Yesterday when we finished, we were at a point in your life when you were about ready to move in with Matt McCartney. Do you recall?
Yes.
Where we left off? Okay. And yesterday I'd ask you if at this point in time you were boyfriend and girlfriend. And it seemed like you didn't have a definitive answer for that. Is that a label you two didn't use, or?
I don't recall when we made things official, but he wasn't seeing anyone else, and neither was I.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I don't recall when we made it official, our relationship. I mean,
Okay.
It definitely became that way, but I don't remember the exact date or time or circumstance, but
Okay,
we weren't seeing anybody else, just each other.
okay. So when you moved in together, it was with the idea that this was a monogamous relationship?
Yes.
Okay. And you were working, I believe you told us you got a job at Applebee's, right?
Yes.
Okay. And was Matt working?
Yes, he was a manager at Subway.
Okay. Tell us what life was like and how was the relationship? How did he treat you?
I see that period of my life as probably one of the best times in my life. He treated me very well. He was very kind. He was very respectful. He was very spiritual. When I first met him, I was a little bit leery of some of the things he was into. I saw some books on witchcraft, and I thought, but he explained to me that he was just seeking, that he had gone to church most of his life, and he and his family are very much into the Native American culture, and so he asked his pastor about the Native Americans, and he was told they went to hell because they didn't know Jesus Christ. So that turned him off to Christianity, and he decided to explore other religions. So about the time that I met him, he was not practicing Wicca, but he was studying it, and so he had kind of explained it a little bit to me so that I wasn't so, I guess, frightened or suspicious or superstitious, maybe, of the religion. And so I never practiced it myself, but I think he did prior to us getting together. And by the time I met him, he was sort of moving on to other, like studying Eastern philosophy and Hinduism and Buddhism and that kind of thing, too. So,
Okay.
I mean, our relationship took a lot of different spiritual turns and twists.
This might be a good point to back up a little bit in terms of, because you mentioned, and I'll use the word spirituality or religious beliefs. At the time that you met Matt, where were you spiritually? Was there a particular religion you were a member of? Could you describe that for us?
I was not a member of any denomination. I considered myself Christian. I didn't attend church, and I didn't obey all the commandments that Christianity espouses.
Okay. So when you talked about Matt and the spirituality, did you become more affiliated with his beliefs, or tell us about that?
We sort of explored together and opened up to other beliefs. We began taking meditation seminars, kind of New Age type seminars, but they had their roots in Hinduism or Buddhism. Maybe some kind of like more modern version of transcendentalism, things like that. We just took these little courses and classes, and we would drive to Portland or the Bay Area.
Okay. Was that a big part of your relationship with Matt?
Yes, it was.
This may go without saying because you lived together, but was this also a sexual relationship?
Yes,
Did you love Matt?
very much. Yeah, I was in love with him.
Okay. And this apartment, did you both contribute to the finances of the apartment?
Yes, all of the living expenses were split 50-50.
Okay. And how long did you and Matt live in this apartment?
We lived in that small apartment for about 5 months, and then we moved to Crater Lake, Oregon.
Okay. And why did you move to Crater Lake?
The seasonal work there is in the summer. It's a very high elevation, so the snow stays till about July and comes back in October. So it's a quick season. It's a busy season. So they have staff housing there at the resort, and we got a dorm and stayed there for the season and worked there.
Did you and Matt live together when you were in this
Yes.
dorm, as you describe it? Okay.
Yes.
And this point in time, then, you're probably several months into your relationship, right?
Yes. At this point, 6 months, I'd say.
I know that probably it's hard to quantify, but was this a serious relationship at this point in time?
Yes, we weren't like heavily discussing marriage, but we were talking about children and what kind of lifestyle we would have if we decided to have a family.
So was marriage on the table, so to speak?
Yeah, it was a future possibility.
Okay. How long in total, in terms of your relationship, were you together with Matt?
I think approximately a year and 8 months.
Okay. In that year and 8 months, did he ever hit you?
No,
Did he ever call you a whore?
no,
A slut?
no,
Three-hole wonder?
no.
What brought the end of your relationship with Matt McCartney?
Well, after the first season at Crater Lake, we came back, and ironically, the same exact apartment opened up again, so we rented the same place where we lived prior to that. We stayed there for some months, and we began to sort of argue over little things. It wasn't anything serious, but it wore on our relationship because it just made things not so enjoyable. So we decided to take a breather from each other. Well, not from each other, but just from our living together. So he went back to Crater Lake for a season, and this time I did not go. I moved to Ashland, which is about 15 minutes south of Medford. It's in Oregon also.
And let me ask you, before you go any further, these arguments that you spoke, you would have little arguments or things would get uncomfortable. Describe what you mean by little arguments, because that can mean a lot of different things to different people. Was there screaming? Was there throwing things?
No, nothing like that. It was more like nagging, like he would leave his clothes everywhere, and I would be like, and what else? Sometimes I would leave a dish somewhere in the living room if we were eating, and so it was kind of like more about housekeeping and that sort of thing, just living together.
Okay,
And those
but
dynamics.
the fights themselves didn't get volatile, from what you're telling
No,
us, right?
they weren't.
Okay. Now you're talking about this period in time. You're starting to have some discord in your relationship. Tell us how that discord leads to the end of the relationship.
Well, we decided to spend a little time apart. We saw each other on our weekends. He would come into town in Ashland and stay with me. And I remember I was with his dad's girlfriend, and she was trying to, I had felt sort of like we were distancing, but I was hanging out with, I can't remember her name, but his dad's girlfriend at the time. And we were trying to download pictures onto his dad's hard drive. And on the desktop, there were some other pictures of this girl. And I didn't recognize her, but I recognized the setting, and it was inside the lodge at Crater Lake. And so the date was also current with this season, which would have been 2001. But it was just labeled with, I guess, an initial, the letter B. So I didn't know who she was, but I wasn't overly concerned about it. But, I just kind of had a feeling. And so I let that go, and a few weeks later, I was working at Applebee's. And I was walking past the table, and two people said, "Hi, Jodi," and I stopped, and I didn't recognize them, and they explained that they worked with Matt at Crater Lake, and they were just in town for their days off. And I just said hi and, checked on them later as they were about to leave, and they said, "We took a vote and think you should know something," and they told me that he was seeing a girl named Bianca at Crater Lake. And so that explained the initial B on that photo. And I kind of said, "Well, does she have dark hair?" And he said, "Yes." And so I figured it was her.
Let me ask you this. What did you do when you had this information?
I was reeling because, of all the boyfriends I had, I would have expected him to not be the one that cheated on me. He was very loyal. I trusted him completely, like implicitly. He could have said the sky is falling, and I would have believed him. I think I would have just looked out the window to see what it looks like. But I asked my boss if I could go home a little early, and he said that was fine. So I think I was let go. It was slow. I was let go around 7.
And just so we're clear, you were living with Matt at the time?
No, he was living at Crater Lake, and I was living in Ashland.
Okay.
So I went home. I changed my clothes, and I decided to. At this time, though, this night, Matt was in Borrego Springs, California, looking
And
for
how
more.
far was that from where you were?
Very far. It's almost by the border. and Ashland is up by the other California border, the northern border.
Okay. So, did you call Matt?
No, neither of us had cell phones at that time.
Okay. So what did you do once you went home early and learned of this information?
Well, I decided that I wanted to find out if it was true. So it wasn't very late. It's about an hour and a half drive to Crater Lake. So after getting dressed, I drove up to Crater Lake to see if I could find out. I had friends that were still there, and the people that told me this I didn't know, so I wanted to find out from them. And there were 2 dormitories there. So I went to the one that's closest to the lodge, because that one was where people would hang out, and so I could find some people that I knew. And I ran into a guy, I think his name was Steve, and I asked him.
Sustained. Are any of the jurors having trouble hearing? Is anyone having trouble hearing? I understand that you reported to the bailiff earlier that you had difficulty yesterday. Anyone who cannot hear today? If at any time you cannot hear, please raise your hand and let me know immediately. All right, you may continue.
Okay, Jodi, you were in the process of telling us you're going to Crater Lake to find out whether or not Matt was being unfaithful to you.
Right. I didn't want to continue in the relationship if that was the case. If it wasn't the case, then of course I would, because I loved him.
Did you find out that information? Were you able to confirm it or dispel it? And how did you do that?
I knocked on Bianca's door, and Steve had run to warn her, so I could hear them talking, and he was very frantic. How do I say this? Well, he's gay, so he kind of is he exaggerates, he's very emotional, and he's very animated, and so it kind of made me chuckle, because he sounded very funny. And I could tell they were nervous, so she opened the door, and I said, "Hi, are you Bianca?" And she said, "Yeah." So she invited me in, because she knew who I was, and so we sat down. There were 2 beds in this dorm. She was staying with another relative. They were both from Romania, and they were here for seasonal work, so she sat on her bed, I sat on the other bed, and we just talked for about an hour and a half, maybe not quite that long, maybe an hour. And she just told me that she started.
Based on this conversation, were you able to confirm the idea that Matt McCartney and Bianca were having an affair?
Yes. Well, yes, they were together.
Okay. Now, in this hour and a half conversation, were you yelling at her?
No, it was just chit-chat, actually. I mean, I was trying not to freak out or cry or get upset, because she had no idea. She was under the impression that he and I were no longer together, so that I didn't look at this as her fault.
How did it feel when you had this information confirmed?
I didn't really allow myself to have much emotion about it until I left her presence, and at that point I allowed myself to cry.
And where were you at this point? Had you gone back home, or is this like out in the parking lot?
Well, at this point it was really late, so I ended up crashing in my friend Eddie's dorm, and he was kind of a family friend. His family is from Wairika. He's friends with Matt, he's friends with me. His father also owned a local restaurant, so we all knew each other. So Eddie said, "You can sleep here," and there were 2 beds in that dorm. And so I crashed there until about sunrise, and then I got up and drove back to Medford.
And at this point in time, when you're driving back to Medford, have you talked to Matt?
No.
When you go back to Medford, what do you do?
I don't remember the sequence of order, but I also confronted Matt, and he confirmed it. And at that point, he was honest about it.
Well, let me ask you this. You say this confrontation. Was Matt back in Medford when you got there?
He came back, but I don't remember if he was there the day that I got back from Crater Lake, or if he came the next day or whenever.
Okay. And what do you mean by confrontation?
I went over to his dad's house. I knew the day he was getting back. And he was on the phone with Bianca when I came over, and he's hung up and he said, I know what you want to talk about. And so we left the house and went to my car, so that his dad wasn't privy to the information, because I think Matt was very embarrassed about it. So we just talked about it, and basically our relationship was over, and it was kind of sad.
Okay. And when was this again, time-wise?
This would have been September. It was right before September 11th, so it was in 2001. I just remember that.
And was this a heated confrontation or just a
No, it wasn't heated. It was just emotional. We were both crying.
Okay. And this time in September of 2001, was that the last time you saw Matt McCartney?
No.
Tell us what happened after you guys, I guess, broke up in September 2001. What happened with your relationship?
I wanted to leave the area because Matt and I had a lot of experiences, mostly all good, in that whole southern Oregon area. All those towns, Crater Lake, that entire area. So it was just every corner that I drove and turned, it was sentimental. So I wanted to leave. So there was a martial arts instructor that I knew, Matt and I knew, and he said that his...
Sustained.
Without telling us anybody what said, what steps did you take in your life next?
He referred me to another place of employment in Big Sur, California.
Okay. And where was that?
Big Sur, California is also in Monterey County, like Salinas. I'd never been there all the years I lived in Salinas. It's south of Carmel, about 28 miles.
And was there a particular resort?
Yes.
What was that?
The resort is called, or it was called, I think it's still called Ventana Inn and Spa.
Now, was that the resort where you met Daryl Brewer?
Yes.
Okay. You applied for a job and were interviewed by Daryl Brewer, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
I was.
Tell us about that period in your life, what you were doing, how you were living.
Well, I drove down there and interviewed with Daryl. It was in the afternoon. I was a little apprehensive about moving all the way out there. There was no place to live. There was staff housing at that resort as well, but nothing was open or available at that time. I was told that when there is an overflow of employees, they are allowed to use the campground if there are open lots, because this was in October now. I think my interview was actually on October 20th because I remember it was Matt's birthday. So during that time, that's a slow season in Big Sur. Things are slowing down, so the campground was mostly all open. So I was thinking of trading in my car to get a trailer, but I wasn't really in a financial position to do that. So when Daryl hired me, I kind of scrambled around and went to an outdoor supply store and bought some equipment. And when Matt heard about what I was doing, he was also looking for work. The position he sought at Borrego Springs didn't pan out, and so he came down to Big Sur and also applied at Ventana.
Okay, so let me understand this. As it relates to Matt McCartney, you said that the breakup conversation wasn't the last time you talked. It sounds to me like you maintained a relationship with him after you broke up. Is that correct?
Yes, there was a period after we broke up when we didn't talk for about a week, and then maybe a couple more. We would say hi briefly on the phone and then not talk again, because it was just, our feelings were tender, and it was just kind of a sticky situation. He was really ashamed of his behavior. I think his mother had shamed him a little. But eventually we began to talk again, if that makes sense.
Okay. And when he, just so we're clear too, you talked about him, or I guess he was going to live with you in this tent, right?
Yes, he was.
Okay. And just so we're clear, was this the rekindling of the romance, so to speak?
Not really. I mean, there were blurred boundaries because we were familiar with each other, comfortable with each other. We weren't actively trying to rekindle a relationship, but there was still a lot of sentimentality.
Okay. Were you still sexual with him at this point in time?
One time. We had sex one more time after we broke up.
Okay. After that, then, it was merely platonic?
I considered it platonic. I still had some feelings for him, but we were not really together, and we were just friends at that point. I got, actually 2 weeks after living in the tent, I secured employee housing, and I think he stayed in the tent for some time, and then he got employee housing also.
Okay. Now, what was your job at this resort? What did Mr. Brewer initially hire you to do?
Initially, I started as just a server in the restaurant. There's a restaurant at Ventana.
Okay. And describe this restaurant for us. I mean, is this a Denny equivalent of Denny's, or just
No,
kinda...
it's considered classified as fine dining. It was once rated 4 stars by Mobile Resorts. It had been featured in Condé Nast Traveler and all kinds of different publications. It had a lot of accolades, and it's kind of a resort where high-profile celebrities and things would go to just to be private and get away from things. So our guests were treated discreetly, and
Okay. Well, as far as jobs go, was this you talked about you had a career waiting tables at Denny's and Purple Plum and all these places. Was this one of the better paying jobs you've had?
as far as, well, most servers work for the tips, so as far as that goes, it was better paying. There was also a bigger tip out, though. So when you have a position like that, it's not just you taking orders and delivering food. You have a lot of help, different people that make the restaurant run smoothly, and so you have a lot of different people, such as the bartender, the hostess, the busser, that you tip out. So even though the tip pool was huge at the end, after the tip out, I was still walking away with more than at Applebee's. So it was nicer.
Okay. And how long did you remain a server with Ventana?
I think I was there 3.5 years.
Was that your only position within the resort?
No, the following summer in 2002, the wedding coordinator, her name was Arlene Murillo, she was having stomach pains that she had been ignoring for several months. And she finally went to the doctor and found out she had pancreatic cancer, and she passed away within a month. So I filled her position temporarily until they could find a more permanent replacement for wedding coordinator.
And you were acting as wedding coordinator, is that
Yes.
right? Okay. And what did that involve?
It involved working with the brides and grooms and how they wanted their reception and their ceremonies set up. There are a few wedding sites at Ventana, and just negotiating the costs with them, and returning phone calls, emails, sending out wedding packages for inquiries.
And were you, at this point in time when you were wedding coordinator, were you in a relationship with Daryl Brewer?
No.
Okay. Tell us, you talked about October 2001, you go to Ventana, you're hired by Mr. Brewer. Tell us about how that relationship evolved.
During that summer, in May, right prior to the summer, the restaurant, it was called Cielo at the time, it closed for remodeling, and so we moved the entire restaurant operation over to the inn, and I helped out with that, and Daryl was heavily involved with that, so we were working closely together, and then also with the wedding coordinating position. We worked more closely together, so I began to sort of develop a crush on him, but he was my boss, so I didn't ever let that on. And then at one point, he pulled me aside and said, I'm going to resign from my position tonight at, I think it was called the briefing. I think it was some kind of meeting we had before the shift started. So he wanted to let me know that, so it wasn't like a shock. I think he let a few other managers know ahead of time.
And how many months were you working with Mr. Brewer before, to your recollection, before he told you he was going to resign his position?
Well, I would have been working with him from the day I was hired, so about a year.
Okay. And at that point in time, it was merely a working relationship? Was it a friendship?
I wouldn't even call it a friendship. We kept that separate. We never fraternized or anything like that. We just worked together.
Okay. So he's advising you that he is changing positions. Do you begin dating then, or just describe that for us?
No, after he stepped down from his management position, he stepped into a supervisory role. So I still didn't, make any moves, or he didn't express anything, and I didn't express anything. But then he decided he was going to step out of that role too. And prior to actually doing that, we had a conversation where we sort of discovered our mutual interest in each other, but we still didn't do anything because he was still technically my supervisor. And about a week later, he stepped out of that position, and we went on a date.
Okay. Now, at that point in time, how old are you in 2001 or two? I guess we're talking about 2002 now, right?
Yeah, I was 22.
Okay. And how old was Mr. Brewer?
He was 42.
Okay. How did you feel about dating someone that much your senior?
I wasn't so much concerned about dating him as I was concerned about how other people might view it. I found Daryl very attractive. He was tall, he was, handsome, beautiful eyes, that kind of thing. We were very compatible, our personalities. I don't know, I kind of saw him as like a George Clooney type, like he's older but attractive. And we had a lot of similar interests. So I think he was more concerned about the age gap than I was, because he was also concerned about how people might view him for dating somebody so young.
When you began dating him, did you know of his, did you know he had a son?
Yes, I had seen him a few times at the restaurant.
Okay. And did you know that he was divorced?
Yes.
Okay. And all those things were okay with you?
It wasn't how I envisioned it, but I guess you can't always control where your heart's going to go. There were things I discovered about him after the fact that he kept very private that I didn't care for, but I already loved him, so I accepted those things.
Okay. Well, before we start talking about those things, let's talk about the evolution of the relationship from that first date. Mm-hmm. You're still living in staff housing, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Just kind of take us through the process of other dates, how the relationship evolved, that sort of thing.
Okay. As soon as he stepped down from the supervisory position, we went to San Francisco and went to a 49er game. We're both 49er fanatics, being from that area. We just kind of toured the city a little, not like a whole bunch of touring, but we walked around Union Square. Being in that business, you know other people that are in the business, so we got a great deal on a hotel room right near Union Square, and it was a good trip. We just continued to do that. I began to come over and hang out on our days off while his son was there, so he got a little more used to me. He was very shy when he was younger. I think I came into his life when he was about 4, 3.5, 4.
Okay. Was Daryl living in staff housing as well?
Yes.
Okay. And you're working together at this time as well?
Yes, he actually became a server, so we're both kind of equal as far as our positions go.
Okay. Do you recall how big a staff there was, at least among the waiters and waitresses there?
Off the top of my head, I'd say maybe 20 people, as far as just the servers.
Okay. Lots of women employed there as well?
There were maybe 7 other women, I think.
Were you, at any point in time, in terms of Daryl's interaction with women while you were dating, did you get jealous? Did you get angry at him?
At him, no, I didn't.
Now, you go on these dates, you're both living in staff housing. We heard about the home you bought together. When did you buy that home?
We bought the house in 2005. I think we closed in June 2005.
Prior to buying that home, what happened we were talking about 2002, you're dating, you're both living in staff housing. Do you live together before you buy that house? Yourself and
No.
Daryl?
No, we had separate apartments.
Okay.
At that point, he had moved back to Monterey, and I had quit Ventana and moved to Monterey as well. And we were working in separate jobs, separate apartments.
Okay. And this was in Monterey?
Yes.
Okay. And you were still would there be a point in time when you say that you and Mr. Brewer were in a monogamous relationship, whatever we call boyfriend-girlfriend, was there a point in time when that occurred?
Yes, I don't remember the exact point in time, but we were either in San Francisco at one of the games, or I can't remember. We celebrated as soon as he was out of his supervisory role. We celebrated and decided to make things official around that time.
Okay.
He was a little nervous about it. He didn't want to get married, so he made that very clear right off the bat.
Right off the bat, he told
Yeah.
you he didn't want to get married.
Yeah, he made his intentions very clear that he liked me and he was attracted to me and he was okay with being with me, but he said, I don't see myself getting married again.
How did that sit with you?
I was young at the time, so it didn't bother me. I figured I still have many years left, and I enjoyed being with him, so that's what I did. I just enjoyed the time we had together.
Okay. And you said just a few moments ago, you said eventually you got to the point where you fell in love with Daryl.
Yes.
Is there a moment in time, or is there a point in time that you can describe for us where you knew that was the case?
I don't remember the exact moment. It was a gradual process. My crush just became more and more, and then I began to really love his son, and we progressed in that regard.
Okay. I asked because you said you got to a certain point where you're in love with him, but there were all these flaws or things that you had to overlook.
Yes.
Once you were in love with him.
Yes.
Could you describe for us what you mean by what you were overlooking, at least from your perspective?
I discovered after I had already developed some deep feelings for him that he was a smoker. He didn't advertise that. I never saw him smoking. So that was the only thing it bummed me out about is that his health. I thought, okay, it's going to affect his health. I mean, he didn't ever smell like smoke. I never knew it. So he had very good hygiene, but I was concerned about his health. And I also, he admitted to me one day that he was an alcoholic.
And those were the two big things that were troubling to you?
Yes, they were. I didn't see myself being with a smoker. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but it wasn't a lifestyle that I wanted. My grandparents were chain smokers for a long time, and I saw how it affected their health very negatively until they finally quit. And I didn't want that kind of lifestyle.
What about the alcoholism? Did that manifest itself during the relationship?
I didn't notice it until after he really talked about it. We would hang out, we would watch football during football season, and we would have dinner at his house. He was a very good cook. And I would notice after dinner, he would take some Stoli out of the fridge, or it was Smirnoff, I think, out of the freezer, and he would pour himself a drink, and okay, whatever, he's just relaxing. But as the hours would go on, I would go back into the kitchen to throw something away, and there was an entire empty 6-pack of Sierra Nevada, and so I didn't see him drink it, and he wasn't changing his behavior. He was the same, so I didn't assume anything really. But when he told me about it, one day he was very troubled over it and was trying to overcome it.
So despite these, you said, you were in love with him. Before you buy the house, you're both living in separate apartments in Monterey, right?
Yes.
Okay. And where are you working?
I was working at an Italian restaurant called Piatti, and also California Pizza Kitchen had opened a restaurant there at their mall, and so I helped open that restaurant, and I was tending bar there.
And to your recollection, where was Daryl working?
Where was he working? I don't know why, I can't remember. I think he was working in Pebble Beach, at a resort in Pebble Beach at the time.
Tell us about the thinking behind the two of you deciding to purchase a home together.
Well, I saw myself eventually becoming a real estate investor. That's what I sort of wanted to do career-wise. And obviously the housing market was taking off in 2005. So I wanted to buy a home and sit on it for a while. And I had good credit, but I didn't have quite the income required for that. So I began talking to Daryl about it, and he also really wanted to buy a home. The Monterey Peninsula was way out of our reach. At that time, like a dirt lot was going for $700,000. So there was no way we were able to purchase property in that area at the time. Also, I should probably mention he stopped drinking. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have considered that. So he's been sober since 2004. So we decided to talk about buying a house together, and his ex-wife was moving to La Quinta, California, which is in Riverside County, I think, and it's right near Palm Desert. So we began making plans to move to Sacramento since she was moving. We wanted to buy a home, but we wanted to stay nearer to Monterey and not come all the way down to the desert.
You said you wanted to become involved in the real estate market. Did you do anything besides just look at purchasing a home? Did you educate yourself, anything of that nature?
Yes, I took real estate classes at Monterey Peninsula College just to become more familiarized with the process of real estate economics, and I don't remember all the other title of the class I took, but it involved real estate. So I took those at the same time I was taking more semesters of Spanish, and began studying it and just paying more attention to real estate market trends and looking at listings and things like that.
Okay. One of the things we spoke about earlier was, all throughout high school, that you had an interest in art, photography, different mediums of art. Was that a business that you were interested in this time, or were you more focused on the real estate business?
It was a business that I saw myself developing, but I wasn't actively